Welcome back. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and follow me at DurtleMTG on Twitter to keep up to date with the most recent videos and other posts. You can help support this content by hitting like and share, and by checking out the links in the description below. Alright, it's time to Durtle. Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'm finally revisiting one of my first generals ever for EDH, Razia, Boros Archangel. Challenging the first Boros Guildmaster for dominance are Muldrotha, Yurlok, and Samut. I win the die roll and begin the journey with a plains into play after I draw a mountain. Muldrotha drops a farce and passes. Yurlok plays a tapped mountain valley. Samut begins their game with a plains into play. My turn brings me Battle Mage's Bracers, and I drop a mountain. Back to Muldrotha, and they drop a swamp. They then cast Dream Devourer, and I briefly consider countering it with the Mana Tithe in my hand because I've not seen it in a Muldrotha deck before, but I decide not to. Yurlok cracks their Mountain Valley on their turn, and grab a Smoldering Marsh to play tapped. A Forest then enters the battlefield. Samut plays a Forest of their own, and Kelith Sunmane Familiar is cast. I draw Illusionist Bracers for some bracing redundancy, and drop a Plains. I cast the Battle Mage's Bracers, and pass my turn. Thespian Stage hits the field for Muldrotha. They then cast Wayfarer's Bauble, and immediately crack it for an island. Yurlok's turn has a mountain into play. They cast Cinder Vines, a personal fave of mine, and they pass. Cinderglade comes down for the Samut player, and they cast Nissa's Triumph. Cinder Vines triggers for the first time, and deals 1 damage to the Samut player. That player then grabs some lands, and the turn rolls to me. Another mountain comes to my hand. I then cast Knight of the White Orchid, and grab a Sacred Foundry with its ETB. I have the land come into play tapped, and then I play Core Haven. I pass without attacking. Westvale Abbey hits the field for Muldrotha. Embodiment of Spring follows it down, and they foretell a card to exile. Luxior, Gaudia's Gift, then hits the stack, and Cindervines does the burning thing. Moving to attacks, the Dream Devourer swings at me, and I take 2. Our Waste comes into play for the Yurlok player, and then they cast their commander. Samut plays a Plateau in their second main, and they cast Arasta of the Endless Web. I get yet another mountain on my turn, and drop a mountain to the field. I cast Brash Taunter, leaving mana up to bluff a Swords or Path, but mostly having it up for that Mana Tithe. At the end of the turn, Muldrotha casts Realms Uncharted from the Foretold Exile, triggering both Arasta and the Vines. To Muldrotha's turn proper, and a Lotus Cobra hits the field. A Forest enters, and the Cobra triggers for some free mana. Embodiment of Spring is then sacked for another land. It comes into play tapped, and the Cobra does the thing. With their remaining mana, they cast Foundation Breaker. I consider countering this as well, but because I have the extra bracers, I let it go. When the Breaker enters the battlefield, they spend some time thinking about targets, but then end up destroying Arasta with the trigger, since it is an enchantment creature. Yurlok plays a Dragon Skull Summit to the field on their turn. They activate their commander, giving everyone black, red, and green to their mana pools. They then cast Tectonic Instability, and I wish my Taunter could tap to spend the errant mana. They then cast War's Toll, and the time has come to cast Mana Tithe. I take 1 from the Vines, but the counter is successful. The phase switches over in the turn, and each of Yurlok's opponents take 3 mana burn, me dropping to 34, Muldrotha to 35, and Samut to 36. Samut's turn has an Anointed Procession to the stack. A Forest comes into play after it, and they pass. I draw a Chancellor of the Annex for my turn, and drop a mountain. Tectonic Instability triggers for the land drop, and I tap all of my mana in response. I use said mana to cast the Chancellor, and move to combat. I swing the Knight of the White Orchid into the Yurlok player, dealing 2 damage. Moving to Muldrotha, they cast their commander, triggering the Chancellor. They pay the 1 to not have it be countered, and it comes into play. Once in play, they put Verdant Catacombs from the graveyard to play, and crack it for a Zaggoth Triome. The Lotus Cobra also generates 2 free mana from these interactions, as well as a trigger from Instability. Back to Yurlok, and they cast Fire Covenant, paying 23 life and 1 extra mana into the spell to wipe Muldrotha's board and kill my Chancellor. Taunter is also a target, but it is indestructible, and when damaged, it triggers. I deal the 1 damage to the Yurlok player themselves with said trigger. Yurlok is then activated, and they use the mana to cast Wilderness Elemental. In response, I activate the Taunter, fighting Yurlok, and deal 4 damage with its trigger to the Yurlok player. Wilderness Elemental enters the battlefield, and the turn rolls over. A Forest comes into play for Samut, and the instability triggers. They tap their mana in response, and then using some of it, they cast Decimate, targeting the Zoggoth Triumph, Luxior, Instability, and the Wilderness Elemental. They pass. To my turn, I draw another mountain. I drop a mountain and cast the progenitor of the Boros host, Razia, Boros Archangel. I move to attacks, and swing the Knight into the Yurlok player, and Razia with haste into the Muldrotha player. Damage is good with Yurlok dropping 2 to 8, and Muldrotha to 25, taking 6 commander damage. To Muldrotha, and they cast Finale of Devastation, where X is 5. Titania, Protector of Argoth, hits the field from the spell, and returns a Verdant Catacombs to play from their graveyard. It gets cracked for an Overgrown Tomb, and they receive a 5/3 elemental token. Myriad Landscape drops to the field, and they pass. Yurlok's turn has a Predated Grasp hit the stack, targeting the Muldrotha player. Yurlok grabs a card, exiling it face down from their deck, and activate their commander for black, red, green mana. They cast Spellbee, and I respond with the Taunter thanks to Yurlok mana, fighting Titania. The Taunter triggers, and I deal 5 damage to the Muldrotha player, dropping them to 18. Price of Progress then hits the stack from Yurlok, resolving to deal 4 damage to me, 8 to Muldrotha, 6 to Yurlok, and 4 to Samut. The phase rolls into combat, and Muldrotha and Samut both lose 3 life thanks to mana burn. Moving to the second main, Spellbee triggers, giving the Yurlok player 6 colorless mana. They use 2 of it to activate the vines, destroying my Battle Mage's bracers, and I take 2 damage. Unfortunately, they are out of colored mana sources, and past the phase, mana burning themselves out of the game. Moving to Samut, they cast Assemble the Legion just as Muldrotha decides to quit the game. The Samut player passes. I draw a Tithe, and drop a mountain. I cast the Illusionist Bracer, and move to combat. I swing both Razia and the Knight into the opponent, and the Samut player takes 8, 6 of which is Commander, dropping to 14. In the second main, I equip the bracers to the Taunter, and pass. The turn rolls over to Samut, and they gain a muster counter on Assemble the Legion, creating 2 1/1 red and white hasty tokens thanks to the Anointed Procession. They then cast Jenny Fae, and follow that up with a Convoked March of the Multitudes, where X equals 4. I respond with casting the Tithe, and just grabbing irregular planes to hand. The March resolves, and they gain 8 tokens, which come into play as 2/2 cats with haste. They move to combats, but after some thinking, decides not to attack, and pass. At the end of their turn, I activate the Taunter to have it fight Razia. Thanks to the bracers, I get an extra activation, more or less, and fight Razia again. With the Taunter triggers resolving, I deal a total of 12 damage to my opponent, dropping them to 2. On my turn, I draw the Birth of Miladies. I move to combat, and swing Razia into my opponent for the win. Good game to my opponents. Well, that was a bit of an awkward game, really. Largely this deck did what it was designed to do, but I couldn't seem to find any of my draw. The Yurlok player really carried the bulk of the game though, especially with decimating the Muldrotha player's board with a Fire Covenant in true Yurlok fashion. The Muldrotha player had some choice things to say about that, unfortunately. Also unfortunately, cards that work well with this deck like Smuggler's Share aren't available online, and unfortunately that cripples the deck a bit. That's it for now though, and until next time, stay safe out there.